Good evening, all, and welcome back to Farcical Fears. Before we begin tonight, 3 listeners died after hearing story number 10. The coroner couldn't explain why. The costume wouldn't come off, and his hands kept carving without him. 13 babysitting rules where breaking Rule 7 makes the children's eyes go black. The corn maze that adds your footprints ahead of where you're walking. Pumpkins that blink and scream when you're alone with them. 127,000 people watched her live stream go dark and something step out of the corner. The HOA neighborhood that votes which family vanishes every Halloween. The haunted house actor who realized he died in that asylum in 1952. The nurse who's lived the same Halloween 13 times and watches herself die at 11:47. The mother who's been poisoning the family for years using candy inspection as cover. And the radio broadcast that contains sounds that permanently break human consciousness. 10 true stories. 10 documented Halloweens, police reports, hospital records, missing persons cases still open. And every single one of them has the same symbol drawn somewhere at the scene. A symbol you've probably seen in your own neighborhood and never noticed. Which story terrifies you most? Drop the number 1 through 10 right now, because by the end of tonight, you'll understand why that matters. If you're new here, subscribe to Farcical Fears for daily true horror content that law enforcement doesn't want compiled in one place. Hit that notification bell because the next story might be happening right now, and you'll want to know the warning signs before it's too late. Story 1. The costume that wore him. Marcus Delaney was staring at his own hands, carving symbols into his chest. He couldn't stop them. The clown makeup was spreading under his skin like an infection, and the mirror showed someone else wearing his face. His mouth was smiling, grinning actually. But Marcus wasn't smiling. Marcus was screaming inside a body that no longer belonged to him. This is exactly what the security camera captured at 11:47 p.m. on Halloween night, 2023. But to understand how a 28-year-old costume designer ended up possessed by a vintage circus outfit, we need to go back 6 hours. Marcus had been searching for the perfect Halloween costume for weeks. He designed costumes for haunted attractions, so wearing something store-bought wasn't an option. His reputation was on the line. That's when he found the estate sale listing in Brooklyn. Vintage circus performer wardrobe, 1960s, complete collection. The address was in Flatbush, an old brownstone that had been locked up since 2008. But what Marcus didn't know was that the previous owner, a circus clown named Emmett Graves, had died wearing that exact costume. And the cause of death was never determined. The moment Marcus touched the costume, his fingers tingled. He laughed it off, probably just static electricity from the plastic garment bag. The fabric felt perfect, looked authentic, and fit like it had been tailored specifically for his body. Too perfectly, actually. But what happened next should have been his first warning. When he looked in the estate sale mirror while holding the costume up to his chest, his reflection smiled back at him. But Marcus wasn't smiling. He blinked, and the reflection returned to normal. Just tired, he told himself. That decision would change everything. By 8 p.m., Marcus was at his friend's Halloween party in Williamsburg. The costume was a hit. People kept commenting on how realistic the makeup looked, how the smile seemed too wide, too genuine. But here's the thing. Marcus hadn't applied any makeup yet. The costume itself was somehow bleeding color into his skin, creating the clown face from the inside out. He tried to wipe it off in the bathroom, but his hand wouldn't move to his face. His arm just hung there, resisting. But what happened next made him realize something was deeply, horribly wrong. Marcus's hands started moving on their own. First, small gestures. waving at people, making exaggerated theatrical movements he didn't intend. Then his mouth started forming words he didn't say. Old-timey circus phrases. "Step right up, folks, and the show must go on." His friends thought it was part of the act. But Marcus was trying to scream for help, and what came out was laughter. Circus calliope laughter from a throat that no longer belonged to him. What happened next changed everything. His phone buzzed. A Google alert he'd set up for the estate sale. Address. The news article that appeared made his blood run cold. Local circus performer Emmett Graves found dead in Flatbush home, 1973. Cause of death, undetermined. Witnesses reported Graves had been acting strangely for weeks, claiming he couldn't remove his performance costume and that it was making him do things he didn't want to do. Marcus tried to tear the costume off. It wouldn't budge. The fabric had fused to his skin like a second layer of epidermis. And then he discovered something that made his blood run cold. A hidden tag inside the collar, with names stitched in fading thread. 7 names. 7 different circus performers spanning from 1921 to 1973. But what happened next made him realize the costume wasn't just cursed. It was collecting people. Each previous wearer's consciousness was trapped inside the fabric, and now they were all trying to control Marcus's body simultaneously. That's when the real horror began. His hands moved toward the kitchen where his friend kept the carving knives. Not to hurt anyone else. To carve the names into his own skin, adding himself to the collection. Marcus fought back with everything he had, but 7 other minds were stronger than one. His friend Sarah noticed him stumbling toward the kitchen and called out his name. For just a second, Marcus regained control, enough to mouth the words, "Call police." But his body kept moving, kept smiling, kept performing. By the time Sarah realized something was genuinely wrong, Marcus had locked himself in the bathroom. That's where the security camera footage picks up. But the worst part was still coming. The symbols he was carving into his chest weren't random. They were coordinates. Police broke down the bathroom door at 11:52 p.m. Marcus was unconscious, the costume covered in blood but completely undamaged. What happened next would haunt investigators for years. When Marcus woke up in the hospital 3 days later, he had no memory of Halloween night. But he kept drawing the same symbol over and over, the coordinates carved into his chest. And when detectives checked those coordinates, they found something impossible. The coordinates led to an abandoned circus ground in Pennsylvania. Underground, they discovered a chamber containing 7 preserved bodies, all wearing identical clown costumes, all dating back to the names Marcus had seen on that tag. But here's what made the case file get sealed. Each body was still warm, still breathing, somehow still alive after decades, trapped in a state between death and consciousness. And that's when investigators understood the terrible truth. The costume doesn't kill its wearers. It keeps them alive forever, forcing them to perform for an audience that no longer exists. Marcus was released from the hospital 2 weeks later, physically fine, mentally shattered. The costume was sent to an evidence locker, tagged and sealed. But 3 months ago, that evidence locker was broken into. The costume is missing, and according to social media reports, someone wore a vintage 1960s clown costume to a Halloween party in Portland last week. The photos show a man smiling too wide, with makeup that seems to come from under his skin. Police are investigating, but what they found in his apartment suggests it's already too late. The name stitched inside the collar now has 8 names, and the 9th space is still empty, Waiting. Story 2. The Halloween Babysitter Protocol. Jade Thornton was standing in the hallway watching the children write her name on the wall in their own blood. Their eyes were completely black, no whites, no pupils, just endless darkness staring back at her. They were humming something that sounded like a lullaby from centuries ago, and their fingers moved in perfect synchronization, spelling out JADE in thick red letters. She had broken rule number 7. If the children ask about the other mother, say nothing and leave the room immediately. But Jade had laughed and said, "What other mother, sweetie? Your mom is at the Halloween party." That was 45 minutes ago. Now the children weren't children anymore. But to understand how a 19-year-old college student ended up trapped in a colonial house with something pretending to be 2 kids, we need to go back 3 hours. Jade had been babysitting for the Morrison family for 6 months, but they'd never asked her to work Halloween night before. When Mrs. Morrison called that afternoon, her voice sounded strange, rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. "We have some very specific rules for tonight, Jade. 13 rules. You must follow every single one. Do you understand?" Jade had laughed nervously. "Sure, Mrs. Morrison. No problem." But what she didn't know was that every babysitter who'd worked Halloween night for the Morrisons had disappeared. All 7 of them. The last girl's phone was found in the basement 3 years later, still recording. The Morrisons arrived at Jade's apartment at 6 p.m. with a handwritten list. Mrs. Morrison's hands were shaking as she handed it over. "Read these carefully, all 13. Don't skip any, don't improvise, and whatever you do, don't break Rule 7. Mr. Morrison wouldn't make eye contact. The rules seemed weird but harmless at first. Rule 1. Never answer the door after 9 p.m. Rule 2. Keep all mirrors covered with a provided cloth. Rule 3. If you hear footsteps in the attic, ignore them. Rule 4. The children must be in bed by 8:30, no exceptions. Rule 5. Do not go into the basement for any reason. Rule 6. If the landline rings, do not answer it. Rule 7. If the children ask about the other mother, say nothing and leave the room immediately. Rule 8. Do not let the children look out the windows after dark. Rule 9. If you see a woman in Victorian clothing, do not acknowledge her. Rule 10. Keep the kitchen lights on all night. Rule 11. Do not read the children any books from the shelf in their room. Rule 12. If you feel cold spots, leave that area immediately. Rule 13. At exactly 11:47 p.m., go to the front door and say, "She's not welcome here," 3 times. That decision to accept the job would change everything. By 7 p.m., Jade was at the Morrison house on the edge of Salem. The neighborhood was old, like original settlement old. Every house on the street had historical markers, and the Morrison place dated back to 1692. Witch trial era. The children, Emma and Luke, seemed normal at first. 6 and 8 years old, excited about Halloween, dressed as a witch and a wizard. They ate dinner without incident, played quietly with their toys, and went to bed on time. Jade covered the mirrors like the list said, kept the kitchen lights blazing, and settled onto the couch with her phone. But what happened next should have made her leave immediately. At 8:45, she heard the children whispering upstairs. Then Emma's voice called down, "Jade, can you come here? We want to ask you something." Jade climbed the stairs, checking the list again. Rule 7. If the children ask about the other mother, say nothing and leave the room immediately. She pushed open their bedroom door. Both kids were sitting up in bed, staring at her with completely normal eyes. "Jade," Emma said in a voice that sounded too old for a 6-year-old. Can you tell us about the other mother? Jade laughed. It was such a weird question, clearly something they'd picked up from a movie. What other mother, sweetie? Your mom is at the Halloween party. The temperature in the room dropped 30 degrees in 3 seconds. Both children smiled. Not kid smiles, but something ancient and knowing. You broke Rule 7, Luke whispered. Now she knows you're here. That's when their eyes started changing. The color drained out like water circling a drain, leaving nothing but black. What happened next made Jade realize the rules weren't protecting the children. They were protecting her. The children stood up in perfect unison and walked to their closet. When they opened it, Jade saw something impossible. The closet didn't lead to hanging clothes. It led to another room, a bedroom that looked identical to theirs, but older, covered in dust and cobwebs. And standing in that room was a woman in a Victorian dress, pale as death, with the same black eyes. She's been waiting, Emma said in that too old voice. Waiting since 1692. Waiting for someone to break the rules so she could come back. The woman in the Victorian dress smiled, and Jade saw her teeth were filed to points. But what happened next changed everything. Jade ran. She made it to the hallway before the lights started flickering. The landline began ringing, that old rotary phone in the kitchen that the Morrisons swore didn't work anymore. The mirrors she'd covered started bulging outward, the fabric straining like something was pushing from the other side. And the children were following her, walking in that synchronized way, humming that ancient lullaby. Jade pulled out her phone to call 911. No signal. The Wi-Fi was gone. Even her emergency calls wouldn't connect. She was completely cut off. And then she discovered something that made her blood run cold. Carved into the hallway wall, hidden behind a family photo, were names and dates. Sarah Mitchell, Halloween 2016, disappeared. Rebecca Torres, Halloween 2017, disappeared. Amanda Chen, Halloween 2018, disappeared. 7 names total, all babysitters, all Halloween night, all disappeared. But what happened next made her realize the house wasn't haunted. It was a prison. And the Morrisons weren't the owners. They were the wardens. That's when the real horror began. The Victorian woman stepped out of the closet, her dress making no sound on the hardwood floor. They promised me 8, she whispered, her voice like wind through dead leaves. 8 souls to balance the 8 they hanged in the trials. 7 down, 1 to go. The children weren't children anymore. They were vessels, empty things the woman could control. And Jade was about to become number 8. She remembered Rule 13, 11:47 p.m. Go to the front door and say, "She's not welcome here," 3 times. She checked her phone. 11:32, 15 minutes. She ran for the front door, but the Victorian woman was faster. The door slammed shut, the deadbolt turning by itself. Not yet, the woman hissed. You have to wait. The ritual only works at 11:47. That's when they hanged me. That's when the door between worlds opens. But the worst part was still coming. Jade realized why the Morrisons left every Halloween, why they needed babysitters, why they gave them the rules. The house demanded a sacrifice every year on Halloween, had demanded it since the witch trials. If someone broke the rules before 11:47, the Victorian woman could manifest. And if she was still manifested at 11:47, she could take the rule breaker's soul and trap them in the house forever, feeding the curse for another year. The previous 7 babysitters were still here, Jade realized. Still in the house, trapped in the walls, the mirrors, the spaces between spaces. That's when she heard them whispering her name. Jade fought. She broke windows trying to escape, but her hands passed through the glass like it was water. She tried the back door, locked from the inside with no key. The children, those things wearing Emma and Luke's bodies, were getting closer, still humming, still writing her name on every surface in that blood that appeared from nowhere. What happened next would haunt investigators for years. Jade found the basement door. Rule 5. Do not go into the basement for any reason. She broke it anyway. What choice did she have? Down the stairs, into the darkness, her phone flashlight barely cutting through the black. And there, on the basement wall, she found something impossible. A mirror. Uncovered. Massive. And in the reflection, she saw all 7 previous babysitters staring back at her, mouths open in silent screams, hands pressed against the glass from the other side. They'd been trapped in the mirror dimension. That's where the Victorian woman kept her collection. And carved above the mirror, in letters that looked burned into the wood, only the ritual words at 1147 can break the curse. Only the living can speak them. Choose. Save yourself or save us all. Jade understood. If she said the words at the door at 1147, she'd be safe. The curse would reset, and the Morrisons would have to find another babysitter next year. But the 7 trapped souls would remain trapped forever. Or she could stay silent. Let the woman take her as number 8. And maybe, just maybe, 8 souls would be enough to break the curse entirely and free all of them. She checked her phone. 11:46. 1 minute to decide. Jade made her choice. She stayed in the basement. When 11:47 arrived, she heard the Victorian woman shriek from upstairs, a sound of pure rage and pure triumph. The children stopped humming, and Jade felt herself being pulled into the mirror, felt her body becoming reflection, felt the cold glass swallowing her whole. But as the 8th soul entered the mirror, something the Victorian woman hadn't anticipated happened. 8 was the number. 8 souls, 8 hangings, 8 points of a star. The curse didn't strengthen, it shattered. The mirror exploded outward in a blast of silver light, and Jade found herself standing in the basement surrounded by broken glass and 7 other girls, all gasping, all solid, all alive again. The Victorian woman's scream echoed through the house one final time. And then there was silence. When the Morrisons came home at midnight, they found 8 babysitters standing in their living room, covered in mirror dust, very much alive. And the children, the real Emma and Luke, were sleeping peacefully upstairs, with normal eyes. No memory of what had happened. The Victorian woman was gone. The curse was broken. But here's what made the case file get sealed. When police investigated, they found the original documents from 1692. The woman in the Victorian dress was Constance Morrison. The family had been feeding her souls for 331 years, bound by a blood pact their ancestor made to avoid execution himself. He'd blamed 8 innocent women for witchcraft, and Constance, the first to hang, had cursed his bloodline to provide 8 replacements. The Morrisons never reported what happened. They moved out within a week. The house sat empty for 2 months. But last week, a new family moved in. They have 2 children, and according to the neighbor who welcomed them, they're already looking for a babysitter for Halloween. The realtor never mentioned the history. And when the new family found a handwritten list in the attic, 13 rules, carefully preserved, they threw it away, thinking it was just a previous owner's quirk. The list is gone. The rules are forgotten. And Halloween is 3 weeks away. Story 3. The Midnight Corn Maze River. Castellano's phone showed she had walked 47 miles. The GPS tracking app was still running, still recording, still mapping her endless path through the corn maze. 47 miles. But the maze was only 3 acres. She'd never left it. She was still surrounded by corn stalks on all sides, still hearing them rustling in patterns that sounded almost like breathing, still finding her own footprints in the dirt ahead of her, footprints she hadn't made yet. Her hands were bleeding from pushing through the stalks, her voice was raw from screaming, and her phone battery was at 2%. This is what the rescue team would find 12 hours later when they finally located her, collapsed in the center of the maze, clutching her phone like a lifeline, repeating the same words over and over. "It's still rearranging. It won't let me out. They're still in here with me." But to understand how a 24-year-old agriculture journalist ended up trapped in a corn maze that literally rearranged itself, we need to go back 8 hours to closing night. River had been investigating local legends for her blog, Heartland Hauntings, and the Thornwood family corn maze in rural Iowa had a reputation. Every year, someone got lost. Every year they were found hours later than they should have been, disoriented and claiming the maze had changed while they were inside. The Thornwood family always laughed it off. People get turned around in corn mazes, it happens. But what River discovered in the county records made her blood run cold. The maze was built on land that had been an indigenous burial ground. Not just any burial ground, a sacred site where the Meskwaki tribe had performed protection rituals for centuries before European settlers forcibly removed them in 1846. And according to the Historical Society archives, 23 settlers who'd built farms on that land had disappeared between 1847 and 1891. All on October 31st. All in the fields where corn was growing. That decision to investigate alone on Halloween night would change everything. River arrived at the Thornwood maze at 9 p.m., just as the last paying customers were filtering out. She'd gotten permission from Old Man Thornwood to document the maze for her article. He seemed amused by her interest in the silly local legends, as he called them. He gave her a flashlight, a walkie-talkie, and one piece of advice. Stay on the main path. The maze is 10 feet wide in most places. You can't get lost if you don't try to. But what he didn't tell her was that his grandfather had found something when they first plowed this land in 1968. Bones arranged in a perfect spiral pattern, artifacts buried in layers, and a stone marker with symbols that matched no known language. His grandfather had reburied everything and never spoke of it again. The Thornwood family had been keeping that secret for 57 years. River entered the maze at 9:45 p.m. The corn was 12 feet tall, blocking out the moonlight, creating corridors of shadow that her flashlight barely penetrated. The main path was clearly marked with reflective tape every 20 feet. Easy to follow. She documented everything with her phone camera. The height of the stalks, the width of the paths, the estimated square footage. By 10:15, she'd reached the center of the maze where a wooden platform offered a view of the entire layout from above. She climbed up, took photos of the maze from above, and checked her GPS. 3 acres, just like Thornwood had said. Neat geometric patterns. 4 possible routes from entrance to exit. Nothing unusual. But what happened next should have made her leave immediately. When River climbed down from the platform and tried to retrace her path, the reflective markers were gone. Not torn down or removed. Just gone like they'd never existed. She swept her flashlight along the corn corridors. Every path looked identical now. No markers, no tape, no indication of which way she'd come from. She tried the walkie-talkie. Static. She tried her phone. No signal. She checked her GPS app. It was still tracking her location, but the map showed her as a blue dot in the middle of blank green space. No roads, no buildings, no landmarks. Just her alone in 3 acres of corn. What happened next made her realize something was deeply, horribly wrong. River picked a direction and started walking. Left, then right, then left again, trying to navigate by memory. After 10 minutes, she emerged into a clearing. The wooden platform, the exact center of the maze she'd just left. Impossible. She'd walked away from it. But here it was again. She tried a different direction. Straight ahead for as long as the path allowed, no turns. 15 minutes of walking. The clearing appeared again. The platform, the center. She was being pulled back. That's when the real horror began. River checked her GPS tracking. The app showed her path, a spiraling line that circled the center over and over, getting closer with each loop but never reaching the edges. She'd walked 2 miles according to the tracker, but she was still in the same 3-acre maze. The geometry was impossible. She started running. Panic overrode logic. Left, right, straight, it didn't matter. She just needed to find the exit, needed to get out, needed to prove this was just disorientation and stress. Her GPS tracker kept recording. 3 miles, 5 miles, 8 miles. The corn stalks seemed to lean inward, blocking the sky, turning the maze into a tunnel that grew narrower with each step. And then she started finding footprints. Her footprints. The treads matched her hiking boots. But they were ahead of her, leading deeper into the maze, pressed into the dirt like she'd already walked this path. Except she hadn't. Not yet. But what happened next changed everything. She followed the EE's footprints, morbidly curious, and they led her to a section of the maze she'd never seen before. The corn here was different. Older, darker, with stalks that looked dried and dead despite it being peak harvest season. And carved into the stalks were symbols. The same symbols from the stone marker Thornwood's grandfather had found and reburied. She photographed everything, her hands shaking. And that's when she heard the voices. Whispers in a language she didn't understand, coming from between the corn rows. Not ahead of her or behind her. Beside her, parallel, like someone was walking through the corn itself rather than on the paths. She called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The whispers stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then the corn stalks started moving. Not from wind. There was no wind. They moved deliberately, bending and straightening in sequence, creating a wave pattern that traveled toward her. The maze was alive, or something in the maze was alive, and it knew she was there. River ran. Her GPS tracker recorded it all, 13 miles now, 15 miles, 20 miles. She was sprinting through a 3-acre space that had somehow become infinite. But what she discovered next made her blood run cold. She found other people, or what remained of other people. A backpack with a driver's license inside, Christopher Mills, last seen October 31st, 2019. A cell phone with a cracked screen. The wallpaper showed a family photo dated Halloween 2016. A jacket with a name tag, Thornwood Family Maze, Staff. And carved into a cornstalk beside each item, the same spiraling symbol. The maze had been collecting people for years, not just disorienting them, keeping them. And then River understood the terrible truth. The Meskwaki protection ritual hadn't been meant to keep enemies out. It had been meant to keep something in. Something that lived in the space between the corn rows, something that existed in the mathematical impossibility of a maze that was both 3 acres and infinite. The settlers who disappeared in the 1800s hadn't been killed by angry spirits. They'd been taken by the guardian, the thing the ritual had bound to this land to protect it. And when the Thornwood family built their corn maze in 1968, they'd accidentally created a perfect feeding ground. People entering voluntarily, getting lost on purpose, playing right into the Guardian's design. But the worst part was still coming. River's phone buzzed. 2% battery. And a notification appeared. A photo had been uploaded to her cloud storage. A photo she didn't remember taking. She opened it. It was a picture of herself, taken from behind, walking through the corn maze. Except she was alone. No one could have taken this photo. She swiped to the next image. Another photo of her, different angle. Then another, and another. 27 photos total, all of her in the maze, all taken tonight, all from impossible angles. The last photo was time-stamped 3 minutes in the future. It showed River collapsed on the ground, unconscious, in a clearing she hadn't found yet. What happened next would haunt investigators for years. River kept walking, knowing now that she was following a predetermined path, that the Guardian was shepherding her towards something. 25 miles walked according to her GPS, 30 miles, 40 miles. Her legs should have given out. She should have collapsed from exhaustion. But something kept her moving, kept her legs working, kept her walking deeper into the impossible geometry. At 11:47 p.m., exactly midnight in the Indigenous calendar, River found the center. Not the wooden platform center, the real center. A clearing where the corn didn't grow, where the earth was bare except for that stone marker Thornwood's grandfather had found and supposedly reburied. It was here now, standing upright, covered in those spiraling symbols. And arranged around it in a perfect circle were 23 other markers, each one carved with a name and date. The settlers from the 1800s. They hadn't disappeared. They'd been marked, claimed, added to the protection ritual. River was meant to be number 24. She felt herself sinking into the earth, felt the dirt pulling at her ankles like hands, felt the corn stalks bending over her like a closing fist. And then her phone died. When the rescue team found her at 8 a.m. the next morning, she was in the center clearing of the maze, the normal center, the wooden platform, unconscious but alive. Her GPS tracker had recorded 47.3 miles walked. Her phone was dead, but when they charged it and checked the photos, there was nothing unusual. Just maze documentation. No impossible pictures. No future timestamps. River told them everything. They thought it was hallucination from exhaustion and hypothermia. But 3 details made the police investigation continue. First, River's hiking boots showed wear patterns consistent with walking 47 miles. Not 3 acres. 47 miles. The treads were worn down to nothing. Second, her backpack contained items that didn't belong to her. A rusted compass dated 1973. A child's bracelet with Emma engraved on it, matched to a girl who disappeared from the maze in 2003. Third, when they excavated the center clearing, they found 23 stone markers buried 3 feet down, arranged in a spiral pattern. Each marker had a name. Each name matched a missing person from 1847 to 2023. River's name had been carved into the 24th stone. Fresh carving, done sometime in the last 12 hours. The Thornwood family sold the property within a month. No explanation given. The new owners tore down the corn maze and planted soybeans instead. But every October 31st, people report seeing lights in that field moving in, spiral patterns. And every October 31st, someone in the county goes missing. They're always found the next morning with no memory of where they were, with their GPS trackers showing impossible distances walked, and with photos on their phones they don't remember taking. The state police have a file now. 17 cases in the last 3 years. They call it the spiral disappearances. And according to the most recent report, the stone markers are multiplying. When they excavated again last month, there were 31 stones, 8 new names, 8 people from the last 3 Halloweens, and 1 blank stone waiting for October 31st, 2025. River doesn't go near cornfields anymore. She moved to Chicago, surrounded by concrete and steel, as far from agriculture as possible. But every Halloween at 11:47 p.m., her phone buzzes with a photo notification. A picture of her, taken from behind, walking through corn stalks that shouldn't exist in a city. Getting closer every year. And last Halloween, the photo timestamp was only 1 minute in the future. Story 4. The Pumpkin Carver's Apprentice. Sienna Park was staring at the pumpkin that was breathing. Its carved mouth was opening and closing, sucking in air through jagged triangle teeth. And the eyes, those hollow, scooped-out eyes, were somehow looking at her with an expression that could only be described as pleading. She could see the candlelight from inside, flickering in rhythm with the breathing, like a heartbeat made of flame. And then the pumpkin screamed. Not a human scream. Something older. Something that had once been human but was now trapped in a shell of orange flesh and fiber, forced to exist in this carved prison forever. That's when Sienna realized what the master carver had been teaching her wasn't an art form. It was a preservation method. And the 43 pumpkins lining the walls of his barn studio weren't decorations. They were people. But to understand how a 31-year-old artist ended up discovering a serial killer who'd been operating for decades using Halloween as cover, we need to go back 1 week to when Sienna first answered the apprenticeship ad. She'd been searching for mentorship in traditional folk art, specifically the dying craft of intricate pumpkin carving that used to be popular in rural New England before mass-produced decorations took over. When she found Fletcher Grayson's listing on an artisan forum, Master Carver seeking apprentice for October intensive, room and board included, Vermont location. It seemed perfect. His portfolio photos showed the most lifelike pumpkin faces she'd ever seen. Not cartoon, scary faces. Real human expressions captured in gored flesh, sorrow, fear, surprise, joy. Each face unique, each face so detailed you could see individual wrinkles, laugh lines, the subtle asymmetry of real human features. That decision to accept the apprenticeship would change everything. Sienna arrived at Fletcher's property on October 24th. The barn studio sat at the end of a dirt road in the northeast kingdom of Vermont, surrounded by forest so thick the nearest neighbor was 4 miles away. Fletcher was 73, tall and thin, with hands that never stopped moving, always carving something, whittling, scraping, shaping. He greeted her warmly, showed her the small cabin where she'd be staying, and led her to the barn where the work would happen. That's when she saw them. 43 pumpkins arranged on shelves that lined every wall, each one carved with a different face, each one illuminated from within by LED candles that made the features seem almost alive in the flickering light. "My life's work," Fletcher said with obvious pride. "Each one takes about 3 days to complete. I've been perfecting the technique for 50 years. But what Sienna didn't notice at first was that every single face looked terrified. The training began immediately. Fletcher showed her his tools, not the cheap plastic scoops and saws from craft stores, but antique implements that looked more surgical than artistic. Some of the blades were clearly very old, with handles made from yellowed bone. "Family heirlooms," Fletcher explained when he saw her examining them. "Passed down from my grandfather. The bone is maple, carved in the 1800s. But the bone wasn't maple. Sienna had worked with enough materials to recognize human bone when she saw it. She said nothing. The first lesson was on facial structure. Most people carve pumpkins from photographs or imagination, Fletcher said. But the truly lifelike work comes from direct observation, from memory, from preservation. He pulled out a leather-bound journal filled with sketches, hundreds of faces drawn in meticulous detail. Every angle, every expression, every tiny feature documented with the precision of medical illustration. "These are my references," he said. "I study faces. I've been studying them my whole life. And now I'll teach you to see what I see." What happened next should have made her leave immediately. Fletcher had Sienna practice on small pumpkins, teaching her to carve in layers, not just cutting through the shell, but shaving it at different depths to create shadows and dimension. By the second day, she was getting the hang of it, producing faces that actually looked somewhat realistic. "Good," Fletcher nodded. "But they're still dead, lifeless. You're carving faces, but you're not capturing souls." On the third day, Halloween was 3 days away, and Fletcher said it was time to work on the real pieces. He brought her to a back section of the barn she hadn't seen yet. A preservation room kept at exactly 34 degrees Fahrenheit, lined with industrial shelving holding dozens of perfectly preserved pumpkins, some clearly dating back years based on the faded stems. "The trick," Fletcher said, "is in the preparation of the canvas." He selected a massive pumpkin, easily 60 pounds, with perfect symmetry and unblemished skin. But when he cut it open, Sienna smelled something wrong. Not pumpkin seeds and fiber, something else. Something organic and wrong. Fletcher cleaned out the inside with practiced efficiency, but what he removed didn't look like pumpkin guts. It looked fibrous, yes, but the color was wrong. Too pink, too flesh-toned. And when he set it aside in a bucket, Sienna saw what looked like small bone fragments mixed in with the stringy pulp. But what happened next made her realize the terrible truth. Fletcher pulled out a jar from a locked cabinet. Inside was a clear gel that looked like petroleum jelly, but smelled faintly of formaldehyde and something floral she couldn't identify. "The preservation medium," he said. "This is what keeps them alive, keeps them breathing, keeps the faces fresh for decades." He began coating the inside of the pumpkin with the gel, working it into every crevice. "In 3 hours, it'll be ready for the transfer." Sienna's voice felt trapped in her throat, but she managed to ask, "Transfer of what?" Fletcher smiled, the first time she'd seen him smile, and it was wrong. Too wide, too knowing. "The essence, of course. You can't capture a real human expression without real human essence. The faces in my pumpkins aren't carved to look like people, Sienna. They're carved from people." That's when the real horror began. Fletcher explained it clinically, like he was describing a legitimate art technique. He'd been perfecting it since 1973, when he'd first discovered his grandfather's journals. The Grayson family had been preservationists for generations, dating back to Victorian mourning photographers who'd found ways to capture not just images of the dead, but something more fundamental. His grandfather had adapted the technique to folk art, specifically to pumpkin carving, using a combination of botanical preservation methods and something Fletcher called essence transfer, a process that required tissue samples from a living subject to create the gel that would preserve their likeness and, in Fletcher's words, a fragment of their consciousness. The 43 pumpkins in the barn weren't just carved to look like people. They contained actual biological material from 43 people, combined with pumpkin flesh in a symbiotic matrix that kept the faces preserved and, according to Fletcher, kept a splinter of the person's awareness trapped inside. "They're not dead," Fletcher said. They're transformed, made permanent, made art, and they'll last centuries with proper care. Sienna backed toward the barn door. Fletcher moved faster than a 73-year-old man should be able to move, blocking her exit. "You haven't even seen the best part," he said. "The faces are just the beginning. Watch." He approached one of the pumpkins, a face carved with an expression of absolute terror, mouth open in a silent scream, and pressed his palm against its surface. The pumpkin's eyes moved, actually moved, tracking Fletcher's hand, then shifting to look directly at Sienna. The carved mouth tried to form words, the pumpkin flesh flexing like muscle. "Help," the pumpkin whispered in a voice like dried leaves rustling. "Please help us." All 43 pumpkins began speaking at once. A chorus of whispered pleas and screams, all begging for death, for release, for someone to destroy them so they could finally stop existing in this nightmare state between life and decoration. What happened next changed everything. Sienna grabbed one of the bone-handled carving tools and drove it into the nearest pumpkin. The face screamed, actually screamed, loud and human and full of pain, and then collapsed inward, deflating like a punctured balloon. The preserved flesh turned gray and crumbled, and Sienna swore she saw something like smoke rising from it before disappearing. One consciousness freed. 42 to go. Fletcher roared and lunged at her, but Sienna was younger, faster, and motivated by pure horror. She grabbed the LED candles and hurled them into the preservation room where Fletcher kept his gel supplies. The flammable mixture ignited instantly. Flames spread across the wooden shelves. Fletcher dove into the fire, trying to save his jars, his life's work, his preserved collection. Sienna ran through the barn, destroying every pumpkin she could reach, stabbing and smashing and crushing, each one screaming or whispering "thank you," as it died for real this time. The barn burned. Fletcher burned with it, screaming about his art, his preservation, his legacy. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived from 15 miles away, there was nothing left but ash and the smell of burning pumpkin mixed with something far worse. But the worst part was still coming. When investigators sifted through the ruins, they found remains, human remains. Bone fragments mixed with pumpkin seeds in ratios that made no biological sense. DNA testing identified 23 of the 43 pumpkin sources. All missing persons. All disappeared in October over the last 50 years. All last seen in rural Vermont near the Grayson property. Fletcher's journals, partially preserved in a fireproof safe, revealed the full scope. His grandfather had started the practice in 1921. Fletcher continued it from 1973 onward. The family had claimed over 100 people across a century, all transformed into harvest decorations, all kept alive in modified pumpkin shells, all displayed during October and then stored in perfect preservation for the rest of the year. What happened next would haunt investigators for years. Sienna was cleared of any wrongdoing, obvious self-defense, destruction of evidence in a serial killer case notwithstanding. But she couldn't stop seeing those faces, couldn't stop hearing the whispers. She moved across the country to San Diego, as far from Vermont as she could get, and never carved another pumpkin. Never even bought pumpkin-flavored anything. Never wanted to be reminded. But every October, she receives a package. No return address. Just a small pumpkin, uncarved, with a note inside that reads, "You freed 43. But grandfather had students too. We're still preserving. We're still creating. And we're still watching." Last year's pumpkin came with a photo. A barn she didn't recognize, filled with carved pumpkins, each face unique, each face terrified. The note said, 87 and counting. The art continues. Police investigated every lead. Found nothing. No barn, no location match, no active missing persons matching the faces in the photo. Either someone is taunting Sienna with elaborate fakes, or there are other preservationists still operating. The FBI has a task force now. They call it Operation Harvest. They monitor missing persons reports every October, looking for patterns, for clusters of disappearances near rural properties owned by families with multi-generational artistic traditions. Last October, they found 3 possible locations. Investigated all 3. Found nothing suspicious. But according to the classified report, one of the properties had a temperature-controlled barn with empty shelves bolted to the walls, fresh saw marks on the concrete floor, and the faint smell of pumpkin and formaldehyde. The owners claimed they'd just cleaned out old storage, had paperwork proving they'd disposed of decades' worth of rotting pumpkins at the local dump. Everything seemed legitimate. The property was released back to the family. But satellite imagery from October 25th showed unusual heat signatures in that barn. Multiple sources of contained warmth arranged in a pattern that matched shelving. Could have been space heaters. Could have been LED candles. Could have been something that breathes. Sienna doesn't carve pumpkins anymore. But she does check missing persons databases every November 1st. Checks to see if anyone disappeared near rural Vermont, near Pennsylvania Dutch country, near anywhere with old agricultural traditions and family farms. Last year, 14 people vanished on Halloween night across 6 states, all last seen at corn mazes, pumpkin patches, or harvest festivals. All in areas with documented 19th century folk art traditions. And in Sienna's mailbox this morning, 5 days before Halloween, there's another package. Heavier this time. She hasn't opened it yet, but she can hear it breathing. Story 5. The Séance Livestream. Ash Reeves watched the viewer count climb as the entity crawled out of their phone screen. 127,000 people watching live. 127,000 people feeding it with every comment, every reaction, every second of attention they gave. The thing was made of digital static and human fear, flickering between solid and translucent. And it was whispering the real names of people in the chat, names they'd never shared online, names it shouldn't know. Ash's hands were frozen on the keyboard, unable to end the stream, unable to stop what they'd started. The abandoned spiritualist church around them was collapsing inward, reality bending, and the comment section was going insane with messages that appeared seconds before events happened, like the chat could see the future or was somehow creating it. This is what 127,000 people witnessed on October 31st, 2024, before every single device streaming the feed simultaneously crashed. But to understand how a 22-year-old paranormal influencer accidentally opened a portal that merged the digital world with the spirit world, we need to go back 3 hours to when the stream began. Ash had built their following to 50,000 subscribers doing standard ghost hunting content, abandoned hospitals, old prisons, supposedly haunted houses. But the algorithm was brutal, and views were declining. They needed something big for Halloween. That's when they found the Church of Eternal Communion in South Boston, a spiritualist church abandoned since 1947 after 13 people died during a séance gone wrong. The building was condemned, covered in warnings, but Ash had a way in through a basement window. They'd promoted the livestream for a week. Real séance in haunted church, Halloween midnight. Whatever happens, happens. What Ash didn't know was that the church had been abandoned for a reason. The séance in 1947 hadn't just gone wrong. It had torn something open, a crack between worlds that never fully closed. The stream started at 9 p.m. Ash set up multiple camera angles, tested the audio, and started their intro. What's up, ghost hunters? Tonight we're doing something I've never attempted. A real séance using the original methods from 1947. Same room, same ritual, same words. The chat exploded with excitement and warnings. User skeptic science. This is fake and dangerous if it's not fake. User believer 1999. Do not read the Latin, whatever you do. User demon hunter X. I've investigated this church. Something is still there. Ash laughed off the warning. That decision would change everything. By 10 p.m., Ash had found the séance room, a circular chamber in the church basement with symbols carved into every surface. They'd brought candles, an old Ouija board purchased from eBay, and a photocopy of the original ritual text from historical archives. The viewer count was at 15,000. Good numbers. Ash arranged the candles in the pattern described in the ritual, placed the Ouija board in the center, and started reading the invocation. The Latin phrases felt wrong in their mouth, like the language itself was resisting being spoken. But what happened next should have made them stop immediately. At 10:43 p.m., the chat started predicting events. User Oracle Eyes. Your left candle will go out in 5 seconds. 5 seconds later, the candle extinguished. User Prophet Code. You'll hear knocking behind you now. Knocking echoed through the basement. User Future Sight. Check your viewer count. The count had jumped to 47,000 in 3 minutes. Impossible growth. Ash felt their skin crawl but kept going. This was the content people wanted. By 11 p.m., the planchette on the Ouija board started moving. Ash wasn't touching it. It spelled out WATCHING, then FEEDING, then THANKYOU. The chat went insane. 73,000 viewers now, and the comments were changing. Usernames were becoming symbols. Messages appeared in languages that didn't exist. And some comments showed timestamps from the future. Posts marked as sent at 11:15 when it was only 11:02. What happened next made Ash realize they'd made a terrible mistake. The entity appeared first as a distortion in the camera feed. A human-shaped glitch that the viewers could see, but Ash couldn't. The chat was screaming at them to run, to end the stream, to stop. But Ash couldn't see anything wrong except their phone getting hot, the stream lag increasing, and the viewer count climbing impossibly fast. 90,000, 100,000, 120,000. Then the chat messages started containing information they shouldn't have. User Void Speaker. Ashley Marie Reeves, born June 12, 2002, Seattle, Washington. Mother's maiden name Kowalski. That was all accurate, all private. Ash had never shared their birth name, never mentioned their mother. User Static Soul. Your sister Megan is watching right now from username GhostFan2024. She's in her apartment at 2247 Pine Street. Tell her the door is unlocked. Ash frantically scanned the chat and found the username. It was Megan, and she was commenting, "How does it know where I live? Oh God, my door just opened." That's when the real horror began. The entity became visible to Ash, not in the room, but crawling out of their phone screen like it was made of liquid pixels and electromagnetic radiation. It had learned to manifest by using the attention of viewers as fuel. Every person watching was feeding it, giving it power, making it more real. And with 127,000 people watching simultaneously, it was strong enough to cross over completely. Ash tried to end the stream. The button wouldn't work. Tried to shut off their phone. It wouldn't power down. The entity spoke, and its voice came through the speakers and the chat simultaneously. "You invited me. They're watching. And watching is permission. Watching is consent. Watching is feeding." The church around Ash began changing, walls flickering between present-day decay and 1947 pristine condition. They could see the original séance happening. 13 people around a table. The moment something went wrong. The moment they all started screaming. But what happened next changed everything. The entity wasn't alone. 13 shadows emerged from it. The 13 people who died in 1947, trapped in the crack between worlds, and now using this new digital opening to escape. But the worst part was still coming. The chat realized they could influence what happened. When enough people typed, "Look behind you," Ash involuntarily turned. When viewers spam commented, "Run," Ash's legs moved without their control. The audience had become part of the ritual, their collective attention creating commands the entity could enforce. 127,000 people with varying intentions, some trying to help, some chaos-hungry, some just entertained, all feeding power into something that was rewriting the rules of reality in real time. Ash's vision split between the physical church and the digital realm. They could see themselves from every camera angle simultaneously, could feel the presence of every single viewer like weights pressing on their consciousness. The entity whispered all their names, all their locations, all their secrets. And according to reports that came later, thousands of viewers experienced simultaneous phenomena. Doors opening, electronics malfunctioning, shadows in their rooms that matched the entity on screen. The stream had created a distributed haunting, affecting everyone watching. At 11:47 p.m., exactly midnight in the original 1947 Séance timeline, something broke. The stream crashed worldwide, every device simultaneously disconnecting. Ash collapsed in the church basement. When they woke up 3 hours later, their phone was dead, the cameras were fried, and they had no memory of how the stream ended. But here's what made the case file get sealed. The stream was never deleted. It still exists in fragments across the internet, reposted and mirrored. And anyone who watches it reports the same experience. The entity appears on their screen, personalized, speaking their private information, and the video length changes depending on when you watch it, adding new footage that continues past where Ash remembers it ending. Some versions run for hours. The comment section still updates with new messages, even though the original stream ended a year ago. And viewer reports suggest that the entity is still manifesting, still collecting information, still growing stronger with every view. Ash doesn't stream anymore. They can't. Every device they touch malfunctions. Every camera pointed at them shows digital distortion in their shadow. And their subscriber count keeps climbing. 200,000, 300,000, 500,000, even though they haven't posted content in a year. Someone or something is uploading videos to their channel. Content they never created. Videos of seances they never performed. And in every video, the entity is there, getting more solid, more real, more powerful. Story 6. The trick-or-treat tax Devin Chang was reading the lottery results when he realized his family's name was on the list. Not a cash lottery, a sacrifice lottery. The HOA newsletter had arrived in his mailbox at exactly 6 p.m. on October 31st, and buried in the back page under Community Announcements was a simple paragraph. This year's selected family, the Changs, 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. Collection begins at sunset. Thank you for your contribution to our continued prosperity. Devin's hands started shaking as he looked out the window at his neighbors setting up for trick-or-treating, all of them smiling, all of them arranging their candy bowls with the same ritualistic precision, all of them pretending this was a normal Halloween. But to understand how a 35-year-old single father discovered his picture-perfect Arizona planned community had been practicing ritual sacrifice for 43 years, We need to go back 6 hours to when Devin first noticed something was wrong. The neighborhood was called Harmony Heights, and Devin had moved there 3 months ago for the schools and safety. Every house looked similar. Desert modern architecture, manicured xeriscaping, identical Halloween decorations provided by the HOA. That was the first strange thing. The HOA didn't just recommend decorations, they required specific ones. Every house had the same inflatable pumpkin, the same orange lights, the same welcome mat. Community aesthetic standards, the bylaws said. The second strange thing was the candy. At 4 p.m., an HOA representative had come to every door with a box containing exactly 100 pieces of candy, all the same brand, all the same type. For consistency, the representative explained. We weigh the children's bags at the end of the night to ensure fairness. Devin thought it was excessive but harmless. That decision would change everything. By 5 p.m., Devin's 7-year-old daughter Maya was in her witch costume, excited to trick-or-treat in their new neighborhood. But when Devin checked the community Facebook group, he saw posts that made his blood run cold. Posted by Harmony admin. Remember, all children must return home by 8 p.m. for bag inspection. Any family found with non-approved candy will be noted in records. Posted by resident Karen M. Does anyone know who this year's family is? My husband thinks it might be the new people on Maple Ridge. Posted by resident Tom H. They always choose the newcomers. 43 years, same pattern. What happened next should have made him leave immediately. Devin clicked on the community wiki, a resource page he'd barely glanced at when moving in. He found a section titled Halloween History, with a timeline dating back to 1982, the year Harmony Heights was founded. Each year listed a family name and the phrase, contributed to prosperity. The Wilson family, 1982. The Patel family, 1983. The Rodriguez family, 1984. 43 families over 43 years. Devin searched for them online. Not one still lived in Harmony Heights. Most had no digital footprint after their listed year. Missing persons reports for some. Unexplained disappearances for others. But what happened next made him realize the terrible truth. Devin went to his basement, the one place he hadn't fully explored since moving in. Behind the water heater, he found a hidden door. Inside was a small chamber, and carved into every surface were names and dates. The most recent, the Martinez family, October 31st, 2024. Their sacrifice ensured another year of prosperity. Property values increased 12%. Crime remained 0. No illnesses, no accidents. The community thrives. At the bottom, freshly carved, the Chang family, October 31st, 2025. Devin grabbed Maya and ran to his car. The street was already filling with trick-or-treaters and parents, everyone moving in synchronized patterns like a choreographed performance. His car wouldn't start. Battery dead, even though it had worked an hour ago. He tried his phone. No signal. Wi-Fi down. Every communication line severed. That's when the real horror began. Neighbors began approaching his house, all carrying their identical candy bowls, all smiling the same smile. Mrs. Chen from next door. Devin, it's tradition. Every community has one. You benefit from their sacrifice the other 42 years, and then it's your turn. Mr. Peterson from across the street. Think of it as taxes. Everyone pays eventually. Your contribution ensures our property values, our safety, our perfection. The HOA president, a woman named Victoria Ashford, stepped forward. The ritual was established by our founders. 1 family per year. Their life force is transferred to the community. It's why we have no crime, no poverty, no illness. It's why everything here is perfect. And you signed the contract. You agreed when you bought the house. Devin pulled out his purchase agreement, the pages he'd signed without reading thoroughly. Buried in section 47, subsection 12, in 4-point font. Homeowner acknowledges participation in community preservation traditions as determined by HOA annual selection process. What happened next changed everything. Devin locked the doors and called 911 from his landline, the only thing still working. The operator answered, "Harmony Heights? Oh, we can't interfere with that. It's private property, private community rules. You signed the agreement." The police wouldn't help. The city wouldn't help. The community had been doing this for 43 years with legal protection, with official knowledge, with systematic cover-up. Devin found his previous homeowner's documents in a filing cabinet. The family before him had been the Martinez family. Their belongings were still in the attic, photos, clothes, children's toys. They hadn't moved out. They disappeared, vanished on Halloween 2024, and Devin had unknowingly bought a house that came with a death sentence. But the worst part was still coming. At 7:47 p.m., exactly 1 hour before the ritual time, Devin discovered the truth about how it worked. In the basement chamber, hidden behind a loose stone, was the original contract from 1982. The community founders had made a deal with something. The document didn't specify what, only called it the provider. In exchange for prosperity, safety, and perfection, the community would offer one family annually. The ritual required voluntary entry into the sacrifice chamber beneath the community center at 8:47 p.m. on Halloween. If the selected family refused, the entire community would suffer the provider's wrath, disease, accidents, economic collapse. Every single family knew. Every single family participated. They'd been feeding people to something for 43 years, and they'd perfected the system. Always choose newcomers, always ensure legal protection, always make it look like the family simply moved away. Devin made a choice. He wasn't going to be number 43. He found gasoline in the garage, found the community center blueprints in the HOA documents, and he understood what needed to happen. At 8:30 p.m., with neighbors surrounding his house and Maya terrified in her arms, Devin set the community center on fire. Not just any fire. He targeted the sacrifice chamber, the ritual space, the place where 43 families had been consumed. The provider's physical anchor. The flames spread fast, consuming decades of carefully maintained evil. The neighbors screamed, not in fear but in rage. "You've doomed us all," Victoria shrieked. "The contract is broken. The provider will take everything." And she was right. At 8:47 p.m., when the ritual should have occurred, something emerged from the burning community center. Not human, not spirit. Something between, a manifestation of 43 years of collected life force that had been sustaining the community. Without its annual feeding, without its sacrifice, it turned on Harmony Heights itself. What happened next would haunt investigators for years. By 9 p.m., every house in Harmony Heights was burning. Not from spread of Devin's fire, but from spontaneous combustion, as if the prosperity itself was reversing, taking back everything it had given. By 10 p.m., the entire planned community was gone. 412 families, all the perfect houses, all the manicured landscapes, all reduced to ash. Devin and Maya were found at the community entrance, unconscious but alive. They were the only survivors. The official report called it a gas leak explosion, though no gas lines ran to that area. The provider was never mentioned. The 43 missing families were never acknowledged. But sealed documents show that similar planned communities exist across the country, all founded in the 1980s, all with suspiciously perfect statistics, all with HOAs that have unusual Halloween traditions. And every single one has a basement chamber. Devin doesn't live in planned communities anymore. He bought an old house in a chaotic neighborhood where nothing matches and the HOA doesn't exist. But every October 31st, he receives a letter from the Coalition of Preserved Communities with a simple message. You broke the contract. 43 communities remain. We're watching. And next Halloween, the provider will collect its debt with interest. Maya still has nightmares about the neighbors' synchronized smiles. And Devin keeps the original 1982 contract in a safe deposit box as evidence, though no law enforcement agency will investigate. Because according to property records, planned communities matching Harmony Heights' structure have been successfully operating for 43 years across 17 states. They're all still perfect, all still prosperous, all still hosting Halloween traditions, and all still selecting one family per year from their newest residents. Story 7. The haunted house actor Thomas Guerrero was staring at the guest who didn't have a wristband. The man was standing in the middle of Corridor 7, wearing a hospital gown from the 1950s, and his hospital bracelet read, Patient 0847, Behavioral Modification Unit, do not release. But Corridor 7 wasn't supposed to exist. Tomas had worked at Nightfall Haunt in Philadelphia for 3 Halloween seasons, and he'd memorized every room, every hallway, every scare. The attraction had 6 corridors, not 7. And this man, this patient, wasn't moving, wasn't blinking, and wasn't breathing. That's when Thomas realized he'd crossed from the scripted haunted house into the real asylum that was never supposed to be accessible. The building was a former psychiatric facility, and the haunt company had only leased the renovated sections. But somehow, tonight, the walls between past and present had dissolved. And patient 0847 had been waiting 57 years for someone to find him. But to understand how a 26-year-old method actor discovered his extreme haunted attraction, had accidentally recreated actual torture scenarios from the building's dark history, we need to go back 4 hours to when his shift began. Nightfall Haunt was Philadelphia's most intense experience, known for its extreme rooms, where actors could touch guests who signed waivers. Thomas played Dr. Blackwell, a sadistic asylum doctor who performed experimental procedures on patients. His room was designed to look like a 1950s surgical theater, complete with antique medical equipment rented from props houses. The script was simple. Terrorize guests with graphic descriptions of lobotomies and electroshock therapy, chase them with fake surgical tools, and force them through a narrow corridor filled with mannequins in hospital gowns. Standard horror attraction stuff. What Thomas didn't know was that the props weren't rentals. They were original equipment from when the building actually was an asylum, and the room he performed in was built directly over the real surgical theater where 73 people died during experimental procedures between 1948 and 1968. That decision to take the method acting seriously would change everything. At 7 p.m., opening time, Thomas was in full character. White coat, blood-stained, surgical mask, the works. The first groups came through screaming and laughing, exactly as planned. But by 8:30, Thomas started noticing inconsistencies. Guests were mentioning rooms he'd never heard of. One woman ran out crying about the hydrotherapy chamber with real patients strapped to tables. There was no hydrotherapy chamber in the attraction. At 9:15, another guest grabbed Thomas between scares and whispered, "That actor in the wheelchair is incredible. The makeup looks so real, like his legs are actually atrophied." Thomas knew every actor in the haunt. Nobody was in a wheelchair. What happened next should have made him break character and alert management. During a brief reset between groups, Thomas stepped into the corridor to adjust his costume. That's when he heard it. Screaming from somewhere deep in the building, but not the fun Halloween screaming of guests. Real screaming, agonized, begging for help in languages he didn't understand. He followed the sound and found a door marked Corridor 7, Staff Only. He'd never seen this door before. It was painted the same institutional green as the 1950s walls, with an original push-bar handle and a small window made of reinforced glass. Thomas pushed it open. The corridor beyond was different from the haunt's carefully designed sets. This was authentic decay. Peeling lead paint, rusted gurneys, broken restraint equipment scattered on the floor. The lights flickered with actual electrical problems, not the programmed strobes the haunt used. And at the end of the corridor stood patient 0847, motionless, staring. That's when the real horror began. Thomas approached, thinking this was an actor from a section of the haunt he didn't know about, maybe a new expansion. "Hey man, are you at the night shift? I didn't see you at the meeting." The patient didn't respond, didn't blink. Up close, Thomas could see details that made his blood run cold. The hospital gown wasn't a costume. It was genuinely aged, stained with decades of use. The patient's skin had the waxy texture of someone who'd been dead for years, but somehow remained standing. And the hospital bracelet wasn't a prop. It was attached with a metal clasp that had corroded into the flesh of the wrist. But what happened next made him realize the terrible truth. The patient spoke. "You're using the words. The same words Dr. Blackwell used. The same procedures. The same room." Thomas felt his rehearsed script die in his throat. "What are you talking about? This is a haunted house. Dr. Blackwell isn't real." The patient's head tilted at an angle that necks shouldn't tilt. Dr. Blackwell was very real. And this is his room. You're standing where he stood. You're wearing what he wore. You're saying what he said. And now he thinks you're him. What happened next changed everything. The corridor behind Thomas shifted. Not metaphorically, physically changed. The clean haunt sets with their rubber props and theatrical blood disappeared, replaced by authentic 1950s asylum decor. He could hear the sounds of an active hospital. Distant intercoms, rolling carts, muffled sobbing from behind locked doors. And when he looked down at his white coat, it wasn't costume anymore. It was real medical garb, name embroidered on the breast pocket, Dr. Samuel Blackwell. Thomas tried to run back the way he'd come. The door to Corridor 7 was gone. Only institutional walls remained, stretching in both directions, lined with patient rooms he'd never seen before. But the worst part was still coming. Other patients began emerging from the rooms. Dozens of them, all wearing hospital gowns from different decades, all bearing evidence of the procedures performed here, lobotomy scars, burn marks from electroshock, limbs atrophied from restraints. They weren't hostile. They were confused. "Doctor, is it time for treatment?" "Dr. Blackwell, you said I could go home today." "Doctor, please, no more therapy. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." Tomas realized what had happened. The haunt company had unknowingly recreated Dr. Blackwell's routine so accurately. The same words, same actions, same room layout, that they'd created a resonance. A connection between present performance and past atrocity. And by embodying Dr. Blackwell every night, Thomas had become a vessel. The doctor's consciousness, trapped in the building since his own death in 1972, had found a new host. Thomas could feel it. Memories that weren't his, medical knowledge he'd never studied, and a growing compulsion to perform the procedures, to continue the work, to treat the patients who'd been waiting 50 years for their doctor to return. He fought it. Ripped off the coat, threw it down, screamed, "I'm not him. This isn't real." But the patients only tilted their heads in synchronized confusion. And from behind him, a voice that was his, but deeper, older. "Of course it's real. We have 73 patients to process tonight. The treatments must continue." Tomas was losing control of his own body. His hands moved to a surgical tray that had appeared on a nearby cart, selecting instruments with practiced precision. No, this wasn't happening. He couldn't let Dr. Blackwell use him like this. What happened next would haunt investigators for years. Tomas did the only thing he could think of. He stabbed himself with one of the surgical tools. Pain brought clarity, broke the possession, gave him control for just a moment. He ran, bleeding, down corridors that kept changing, past rooms full of patients in various states of decay, past operating theaters where procedures were still happening, performed by doctors who'd been dead for decades. He found a window. 19th floor. Didn't care. He broke through and fell into the present, landing in a dumpster outside the haunt's employee entrance. Security found him at midnight, bleeding from a self-inflicted stab wound, raving about patients and corridors that didn't exist. The haunt management shut down for investigation. Police searched every inch of the building. They found the 6 corridors of the attraction, all accounted for. No corridor 7, no patients. No patient 084 But they did find something in the architectural records. The building had been configured with 7 corridors originally. Corridor 7 had been sealed in 1972 after Dr. Samuel Blackwell died by suicide in his surgical theater, unable to cope with what he'd done to 73 patients during experimental behavioral modification trials. The corridor was bricked up, declared structurally unsound, and erased from official floor plans. But here's what made the case file get sealed. Tomas's costume, the white coat he'd ripped off, was found in the sealed corridor when they broke through the wall. 73 years of decay in 4 hours, and embroidered on it, in thread that predated the building's conversion to a haunt, was the name, Dr. Samuel Blackwell. Tomas doesn't act anymore. Can't. Every time he tries to perform, he feels Dr. Blackwell pushing for control, whispering medical procedures, demanding to finish the work. And according to recent reports, Nightfall Haunt reopened with new management and a redesigned layout. They avoid the section where Corridor 7 was sealed. But employees report hearing screaming from behind the walls. And last Halloween, a guest posted a photo from inside the attraction showing a reflection in a medical cabinet mirror. A man in a hospital gown with a bracelet reading Patient 0847, standing in a corridor that shouldn't exist. Story 8. The Halloween Time Loop. Zara Okonkwo was watching herself die for the 13th time. She stood in the emergency room corridor at County General Hospital, invisible to everyone around her, watching the resuscitation team work on a woman on Gurney 7. The woman had Zara's face, Zara's nurse scrubs, Zara's identification badge. The heart monitor showed flatline. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. And then everything reset. The clock jumped back to 6 p.m., the dead body vanished, and Zara found herself back at the nurse's station starting her Halloween night shift exactly as she had 12 times before. But this loop was different. This time, Zara remembered all 13 previous loops. And this time, she understood the terrible truth. She wasn't trapped in a time loop trying to prevent her death. She was already dead. She'd been dead since the first Halloween night. and these loops were her consciousness refusing to accept it. Replaying the same 6 hours over and over, trying to find a reality where she survived. But to understand how a 29-year-old ER nurse became trapped in a temporal death cycle, we need to go back to the first loop, to the moment everything actually happened. Loop 1, October 31st, 6 p.m. Zara started her shift like any Halloween, expecting the usual chaos of costume accidents, alcohol poisoning, and teenagers who ate too much candy. The ER was busy but manageable. At 7:15, a patient arrived in Ambulance Bay 3. Male, mid-40s, massive trauma from a car accident on Route 76. Zara was assigned to his care. What she didn't know was that this patient, listed as John Doe because he carried no identification, was already dead on arrival. Brain death. But something kept the body animated, kept it breathing, kept the heart pumping. At 8:30, while Zara was checking his vitals, the patient's eyes opened. His hand grabbed her wrist with impossible strength. He spoke in a voice that shouldn't come from a dead throat. "You can see me because you're like me. You just don't know it yet." Zara tried to pull away. Couldn't. The patient's grip was crushing her wrist bones. "Check the time. 11:47. That's when it happens. That's when you'll understand." He released her and flatlined immediately. Zara's wrist was bruised, but not broken. She reported the incident to the attending physician, who found nothing unusual in the records. According to the charts, the patient had never regained consciousness. But Zara's wrist had the marks. What happened next should have made her leave the hospital. At 9 p.m., Zara started noticing inconsistencies. A child with a broken arm in exam room 4, she could have sworn she'd treated the same injury an hour earlier. But the records showed this was the patient's first visit. A drunk driver in Bay 2 who repeated the exact same slurred sentences she'd heard before. A woman having an allergic reaction who seized at the exact same second, Zara predicted. Déjà vu, she told herself. Stress, long shift. But what happened next made her realize something was deeply wrong. At 10:30, a mass casualty event. A party bus crashed on the interstate, 37 patients incoming. The ER went into crisis mode. Zara worked triage, making the impossible decisions about who gets treated first, who waits, who might not make it. She saved 14 people that night, lost 9. But at 11:47 p.m., while Zara was checking on a stabilizing patient in the corridor, something happened. An equipment cart broke loose, rolling down the hallway. It struck her. She felt ribs crack, felt her head hit the floor, felt the room spinning. And then the heart monitor next to her showed her own failing vitals as the team tried to save her. Time of death, 11:47 p.m. Then she was back at the nurse's station. 6 p.m., Halloween night. Starting her shift again, that decision to try to prevent the accident would change everything. Loop 2 through 12. Zara tried everything. She avoided the hallway where the cart would break loose, but a different accident killed her at 11:47. She called in sick, woke up dead in her apartment at 11:47. She tried to save everyone from the bus crash by calling in extra staff early. The crash happened in a different location with different victims, and she still died at 11:47. Each loop taught her something new. The John Doe patient arrived in every loop. He always said the same words, and he was always dead before arrival, despite appearing alive. The exact number of patients changed, but the outcomes remained eerily similar. No matter what Zara did, she died at 11:47 p.m. What happened next made her understand the terrible truth. Loop 13. Zara finally looked at her own medical records. She had to break into the hospital archives, had to access files she shouldn't see. And there it was. Zara Okonkwo, admitted to County General ER on October 31st. Arrived 11 p.m. via ambulance. Massive head trauma from workplace accident. Pronounced dead at 11:47 p.m. But the date on the file wasn't this year. It was last year. Halloween night, 1 year ago. The first loop hadn't been the beginning. It had been the end. Zara had died a year ago, and her consciousness had been trapped in the hospital ever since, replaying the night of her death over and over, each time forgetting she was already gone, each time trying to save herself from something that had already happened. That's when the real horror began. Zara realized that everything she remembered from the past year, birthdays, holidays, conversations with family, were fantasies her dying brain had created to cope with death. None of it was real. She'd never left the hospital. She'd been here for 365 days, looping through the same 6-hour shift, dying again and again at 11:47. The John Doe patient was her guide, another ghost, trying to make her understand. But what happened next would haunt investigators for years. Loop 13, 11:30 p.m. Zara stopped trying to prevent her death. Instead, she went looking for the truth. She found the security footage from 1 year ago, the original night. Watched herself get hit by the equipment cart. Watched herself die. And then watched something impossible. Her body remained on the floor for 17 minutes before the coroner arrived. But in those 17 minutes, on the security feed, Zara saw herself get up, brush off her scrubs, and return to work. A ghost continuing her shift, unaware she died, visible on cameras, but not to the living staff around her. She'd been haunting the hospital for a year, working shifts, treating patients who might or might not be real, living in a death loop that reset every 6 hours because her consciousness couldn't accept the end. But the worst part was still coming. At 11:45 p.m., 2 minutes before the reset, Zara found the John Doe patient. He was in the morgue, his body from Loop 1 still unclaimed, still unidentified. She stood over his corpse and spoke. "I understand now. I'm dead. So are you. How do we stop the loop?" The corpse's eyes opened. "We don't. This is what we are now. Ghosts bound to the place we died, replaying our deaths forever. But Loop 13 is special. Now that you know the truth, you get to choose. Accept death and move on, or stay and help others like us." Zara looked around the morgue. 17 other bodies, all unclaimed. All died in the hospital on various Halloween nights dating back decades. All of them conscious, all trapped in loops only they could perceive. What happened next changed everything. Zara chose to stay. At 11:47, when the reset happened, she didn't forget anymore. She remained aware through the transition, watched the hospital shimmer between real and her personal death echo. And she started seeing them. The other ghosts. The nurse who died in 1987. The doctor who had a heart attack in 2004. The patient who never woke up from surgery in 2015. All of them looping, all of them aware now that Zara had broken through. She'd become the guide. The one who helps newly dead understand what happened to them. And every Halloween at 11:47 p.m., Zara dies again in the corridor of County General Hospital. The living staff walk past her body, never knowing it's there. But the dead can see her, and she tells them the truth. You died. You're looping. And now you have to choose. Let go or help others like us. According to hospital staff reports, County General has had unusual occurrences every Halloween for decades. Equipment malfunctions at 11:47 p.m. Patients report seeing nurses who don't exist on the roster. Security cameras show figures in corridors that no one remembers seeing in person. The hospital administration calls it electromagnetic interference. But the night shift nurses know better. They leave offerings at Locker 13, Zara's old locker, every Halloween. Coffee, snacks, notes thanking her for watching over them. Because even in death, Nurse Okonkwo is still working her shift, still saving people, still trapped in the loop. And every year at 11:47 p.m. on Halloween, if you're in County General's ER corridor, you might see her. A nurse in blood-stained scrubs, checking on patients who died years ago, forever working the shift that never ends. Story 9. The Candy Inspection. Luna Brennan was 8 years old when she realized her mother was a serial killer. She was sitting at the kitchen table on Halloween night, watching Mom sort through the trick-or-treat candy with latex gloves and a pen light, supposedly checking for tampering. That's what Mom had always said. You can never be too careful. People put razors in apples, poison in candy. I'm keeping you safe. But this year, Luna noticed something she'd never seen before. Mom wasn't removing suspicious candy. She was adding things to it. Tiny pinpricks in wrapped chocolate bars, clear liquid from an eyedropper onto gummy bears, powder residue transferred from a small vial onto lollipop sticks. And then Mom carefully placed those pieces back into Luna's bag, marking them with an invisible system only she could see. A slight bend in the wrapper, a particular orientation in the bag. This is what Luna witnessed at 9 p.m. on October 31st, 2024. But to understand how a second grader uncovered 15 years of carefully orchestrated murders disguised as Halloween candy poisoning, we need to go back to Luna's first memory of Halloween and the candy inspection ritual that had been happening in her family since before she was born. Luna's grandmother died on November 2nd, when Luna was 3 years old. She didn't remember much, but she remembered Grandma getting very sick after Halloween, remembered the ambulance, remembered Mom crying in a way that seemed more like relief than grief. At the funeral, Luna's aunt whispered to another relative. Dorothy always said she felt sick after eating Luna's leftover candy, and Sarah always insisted on inspecting everyone's candy, even the adults. The comment meant nothing to a 3-year-old, but Luna's brain had filed it away. When Luna was 5, her uncle got violently ill on November 1st. Liver failure, the doctor said. Unexplained. He died 3 days later. Luna remembered Mom bringing him a bowl of Halloween candy from Luna's inspection pile. The suspicious ones. Mom said she'd keep for herself, but then gave away. At 6, Luna's grandfather had a stroke on November 3rd, dead within hours. Mom had visited him on November 1st, bringing a care package that included candy from Luna's Halloween haul. At 7, Luna's aunt collapsed during Thanksgiving dinner. Neurological damage, they said. She survived, but with permanent disability. She'd been staying with them over Halloween. Mom had given her candy from the inspection batch. That decision to start paying attention would change everything. This year, Luna turned 8 on October 15th. Old enough to notice patterns. Old enough to remember. Old enough to understand that 4 family members getting sick or dying in the days after Halloween, always after consuming candy from Mom's inspection process, wasn't coincidence. So Luna watched carefully during this year's inspection. And that's when she saw it. Mom wasn't protecting her from poison candy. Mom was creating it. What happened next should have made Luna scream, run, tell someone. But 8-year-olds who've grown up with monsters learn to stay quiet, to gather evidence, to survive. Luna said nothing. She watched where Mom placed the doctored candy in her bag. She memorized the markers, the bent wrappers, the specific angles. And when Mom left the kitchen to answer the phone, Luna switched the bags. She took her older sister Chloe's bag, which hadn't been inspected yet, and swapped it with her own. Mom returned, finished Chloe's inspection without adding anything. Chloe was 17 and didn't eat much candy anyway, and handed both bags back. "You can have 3 pieces tonight, then we'll save the rest," Mom said with a smile that Luna now recognized as something predatory. Luna chose 3 pieces from safe locations in the bag. Chloe took a handful from Luna's original bag, the one now in her possession, and went to her room. Luna felt sick. She'd just inadvertently fed poisoned candy to her sister. But what happened next made her realize the poisoning was targeted, not random. Chloe ate 5 pieces of candy. Nothing happened. She was fine. Luna didn't sleep that night, watching Chloe breathe, waiting for symptoms. Nothing. The candy that was poisoned for Luna didn't affect Chloe. That's when Luna understood. Mom had been customizing the poison. Different dosages, different compounds, maybe even different poisons entirely based on the victim's size, metabolism, medical history. Mom wasn't just a killer. She was a sophisticated, calculating murderer who'd been using Halloween as cover for over 15 years. That's when the real horror began. Luna went searching through the house while Mom slept. Found a locked file cabinet in the basement. Picked the lock. She'd learned from YouTube videos watched in secret. Inside, life insurance policies. 15 of them. Every family member who died or gotten sick after Halloween had a policy with Mom as beneficiary. Grandma, $200,000. Uncle, $350,000. Grandfather, $400,000. Aunt's disability payout, ongoing monthly payments, total collected over 15 years, over $2.3 million. But that wasn't all. Luna found a journal, Mom's handwriting, detailed records of each poisoning, victim name, poison used, dosage calculation, delivery method, projected timeline of symptoms, actual timeline of symptoms, insurance payout amount. It read like a scientific experiment log. Grandma, arsenic trioxide, delivered via chocolate-covered cherries, 3-day onset, successful. Uncle, ricin, delivered via caramel apple coating, 2-day onset, successful. Grandfather, antifreeze, delivered via hard candy, 1-day onset, successful. Aunt, controlled mix of neurotoxins, delivered via gummy bears, delayed onset, partial success. And at the bottom of the current page, Luna, age 8, 52 pounds, target, liver and neurological compound X mix, delivery via Halloween inspection, projected onset 48 hours, insurance policy matures in 30 days, projected payout $500,000. Mom was planning to kill her. Had been planning it since Luna's birthday, when the life insurance policy reached its maturity date. What happened next changed everything. Luna took photos of everything with Chloe's phone. Every journal page, every insurance document, every vial in Mom's poison collection hidden behind the file cabinet. And then Luna did something that would haunt investigators for years. She switched the poison vials. The one labeled for her, she switched with the one labeled personal supply, do not use for operations. She found out later it was Mom's antidepressant medication, completely harmless. But Mom didn't know Luna had been in the basement, didn't know the evidence had been photographed, didn't know the poison had been switched. On November 1st, Mom made herself a cup of coffee and added what she thought was her morning medication from her personal vial. It was actually a concentrated dose of the compound she'd prepared for Luna. Liver and neurological toxins designed for a 52-pound child, but consumed by a 130-pound adult. Mom collapsed within an hour. Emergency services arrived at 10:30 a.m. Luna played the terrified daughter perfectly. "I don't know what happened. She just fell down. Please help my mom." Mom was rushed to County General. The doctors found massive organ failure from unknown toxin exposure. Standard tox screen came back with compounds that shouldn't be in a human body. Police were called. That's when Luna gave them Chloe's phone with all the photos. Told them about the Halloween candy inspection. Told them about the basement file cabinet. Told them everything in the flat, unemotional voice of a child who'd been living with a killer and had simply waited for the right moment to act. But the worst part was still coming. When police searched the basement, they found more than 15 victims. The journal went back 23 years. Mom had been killing family members since before she got married. Luna's father, who'd supposedly died in a car accident when Luna was 2, was in the journal. Brake fluid contamination, delivery via coffee creamer, 3-week onset, vehicular accident as expected, insurance payout $750,000. Luna's father had been murdered, and 2-year-old Luna had been in the car when it crashed. She'd survived. He hadn't. Mom had been willing to risk her own daughter's life to collect insurance money. The investigation uncovered 18 murders over 23 years. All family members. All died between November 1st and Thanksgiving. All had life insurance policies with Sarah Brennan as beneficiary. All had consumed food or candy that Sarah had inspected for safety. What happened next would haunt investigators for years. Sarah survived the poisoning. Her adult metabolism processed enough of the toxin that she didn't die, though she suffered permanent organ damage. She was arrested in her hospital bed, charged with 18 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. The trial was brief. The journal, the photos, the insurance documents, all inadmissible from a defense standpoint. Sarah's lawyer tried to argue that an 8-year-old had fabricated evidence, but forensic analysis proved the journal's handwriting was Sarah's. The fingerprints on the poison vials were Sarah's, and the financial records were indisputable. Luna testified in closed court, described the candy inspection ritual, described watching her mother add poison this year, described finding the journal, described switching the vials. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes. Guilty on all counts. But here's what made the case file unusual. Luna showed no trauma symptoms, no nightmares, no anxiety. When the court-appointed psychologist asked her how she felt about her mother going to prison for life, Luna said, "I feel safe now. I was always smart enough to know something was wrong. I just wasn't old enough to do anything about it until this year." The psychologist noted, "Patient displays remarkable emotional regulation and strategic thinking unusual for her age. Possible early indicators of sociopathy, but given circumstances, appears to be adaptive survival mechanism." Luna lives with Chloe now. They moved across the country, changed their last name, started over. Luna is 11 now, doing well in school, normal by all accounts. But every Halloween, she refuses to trick or treat, refuses to touch candy. And according to her sister, Luna keeps a journal of her own, documenting everyone she meets, their patterns, their weaknesses, everything she'd need to know to protect herself if anyone ever threatened her again. Sarah sends letters from prison. Luna never opens them. But the prison mailroom reports that Sarah's letters always arrive in late October, always reference Halloween, and always end with the same sentence. "I taught you well, baby girl. You're more like me than you'll ever admit." And that's what keeps the case investigators up at night. Not that an 8-year-old stopped a serial killer, but that she did it with the same cold calculation, the same patient planning, the same ruthless efficiency that her mother had used for 23 years. Like mother, like daughter. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And somewhere in America, under a new name, Luna Brennan just turned 11. This Halloween, she'll be staying home. Not handing out candy, not inspecting candy, just watching, always watching. Because she learned from the best that the real monsters don't wear costumes. They smile at you across the kitchen table and tell you they're keeping you safe while planning exactly how you'll die. Story 10. The October broadcast, Felix Nordstrom was listening to the sound file that had killed 3 people. The audio was 47 seconds long, contained frequencies that shouldn't exist in nature, and somehow transmitted visual information through sound waves alone. He'd been warned not to play it. The FCC had classified it. The FBI had confiscated every recording. But Felix was a radio engineer with 40 years of experience, and he needed to understand what had come through his station's emergency broadcast system at exactly 11:47 p.m. on Halloween night, 2023. So he sat alone in his basement studio with headphones on, his finger hovering over the play button, knowing that the last 3 people who'd listened to this recording had died in their sleep within 72 hours. Cause of death: unexplained catastrophic brain hemorrhaging. But to understand how a small-town AM radio station became the entry point for something that treats Halloween as a dimensional thinning point, we need to go back to that night 1 year ago when Felix first received the transmission. October 31st, 2023, 11:47 p.m. Felix was running the overnight Halloween programming at WXRT, a small AM station in rural Minnesota that mostly played classic rock and local news. The playlist was automated. The building was empty, except for him. And he was mostly reading a book when every piece of equipment in the station simultaneously activated. The emergency broadcast system, which only government agencies could trigger, began transmitting. But the content wasn't an emergency alert. It was something else. The signal started as pure tone, a frequency that made Felix's teeth ache and his vision blur. Then it shifted, modulated, became something that sounded almost like speech, but in no language Felix recognized. And as he listened, unable to turn it off because the equipment wouldn't respond to his controls, he began seeing things. Not in the room, in his mind. Images transmitted directly to his visual cortex through audio processing. He saw a spiral pattern that seemed to rotate in impossible directions. He saw symbols that hurt to look at. He saw what appeared to be a doorway opening in space, and something massive pressing against it from the other side, trying to push through. The broadcast lasted 47 seconds. Then everything shut off simultaneously. Equipment powered down, emergency systems reset, and Felix was left sitting in absolute darkness, his nose bleeding, his hands shaking, his mind full of images that wouldn't fade. What happened next should have made him report it immediately. Felix checked the recording logs. The broadcast had been captured automatically. But when he tried to play it back, 3 things happened. His recording equipment exploded in a shower of sparks. His computer screen displayed those same spiral symbols for 3 seconds before crashing. And he felt something, watching him from the corner of the room where nothing stood. He reported it to the FCC the next morning. They arrived within 6 hours. Not the local field office, but agents from Washington, D.C. with classified clearance badges. They confiscated every recording, every piece of equipment that had been active during the transmission, and every log file from the station's servers. They made Felix sign a non-disclosure agreement with criminal penalties for violation. And they told him this: the October broadcast is a recurring phenomenon. It's happened on Halloween night across different stations, different years, different countries, dating back to the invention of radio in 1901. We don't know what it is. We don't know where it originates. We only know that people who listen to the full recording die. Stop asking questions, Mr. Nordstrom. Forget this happened. That decision to ignore the warning would change everything. Felix started researching, found newspaper archives mentioning similar incidents. New York, 1952. Tokyo, 1976. London, 2001. Every 20 to 30 years, a radio station would receive an unexplained 47-second transmission on Halloween at 11:47 p.m. Every time, listeners reported seeing images while hearing the sound. Every time, some of those listeners died mysteriously within days. The pattern was consistent across 75 years and multiple continents. But what happened next made him realize this wasn't random interference or mass hysteria. Felix obtained recordings from the historical incidents through underground radio enthusiast networks. He analyzed them using modern audio forensic software. The results were impossible. Each recording, despite being from different years and different countries, contained the same bass frequency, the same modulation pattern, the same embedded visual data. It was the exact same transmission, repeated across decades, as if something was broadcasting on a schedule that transcended normal time. And the visual data, when extracted and rendered as images, showed the same thing in every recording. That spiral doorway, getting wider with each Halloween. In 1952, it was barely a crack. By 2001, it was large enough to see something massive behind it. In Felix's 2023 recording, the thing behind the doorway was pressing against it with what looked like limbs that had too many joints. That's when the real horror began. Felix discovered that the deaths weren't random. People who died after listening all had something in common. They'd listened to the complete 47 seconds without interruption. Those who'd stopped partway through or been interrupted survived. It was as if the full transmission completed some kind of process in the listener's brain. A process that ended in fatal hemorrhaging once the implanted information fully integrated. But what that information was, Felix couldn't determine without listening himself. And that's when he made the choice that would haunt investigators for years. Felix decided to listen, but with a difference. He'd monitor his own brain activity using EEG equipment while listening, recording what happened neurologically during the transmission. If he was going to die, at least he'd document it. At least someone would understand. He set up the equipment in his basement studio on October 30th, 2024. Placed the recording on an isolated computer with no network connection. Attached EEG sensors to his scalp. Started recording his brain activity, and pressed play. What happened next changed everything. The audio was worse than he remembered. The pure tone that opened the transmission seemed to vibrate his skull from the inside. Then came the modulations. Sounds that his ears processed as speech, but his brain couldn't translate, creating a feedback loop of comprehension and confusion. The EEG went wild. His brain activity spiked in regions that shouldn't activate from audio input alone. Visual cortex, spatial reasoning, areas associated with transcendent experience. And then he saw it. Not a memory of last year's vision, but live, real-time hallucination, more vivid than reality. The spiral doorway opened in his basement, overlaying normal space like a double-exposure photograph. He could see his studio and the impossible void simultaneously. And he could see what was coming through. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't a monster. It was information. Pure, raw, existential information about the nature of reality. Information that human brains weren't structured to process. Felix understood in that moment why listeners died. The human brain, when exposed to this information, tried to rewire itself to accommodate the impossible knowledge. And in most people, that rewiring process caused catastrophic structural failure, hemorrhaging, death. But Felix's brain, perhaps because he was expecting it, perhaps because he'd spent decades analyzing audio patterns, perhaps just because of luck, his brain was adapting. Slowly, painfully, but adapting. The 47 seconds ended. Felix was still alive. His brain was on fire with new understanding he couldn't fully articulate. But he was alive. And the EEG showed something remarkable. His neural patterns had changed. Permanently, areas of his brain that had never communicated before were now connected. He'd been rewired by the transmission, but the worst part was still coming. Felix understood what the broadcast was now. It wasn't a signal, it was a test. Something vast and non-human used Halloween, the one night when folklore said the veil between worlds was thin, to probe our dimension, to find human minds capable of processing information from outside our reality. The deaths weren't intentional casualties. They were failures, people whose brains couldn't handle the upgrade. But those who survived, like Felix now had, became something new. Receivers, capable of perceiving frequencies beyond normal human range, capable of understanding concepts that existed outside linear time, capable of seeing the thing behind the doorway not as a threat, but as what it actually was. First contact. Not with aliens from another planet, but with entities from adjacent dimensions that intersected with ours only on specific dates when cosmic conditions aligned. Halloween wasn't just superstition. It was astronomy. Dimensional astronomy that ancient humans had observed and ritualized without understanding the mechanism. What happened next would haunt investigators for years. Felix tried to share his discovery. He wrote reports, contacted university researchers, attempted to publish findings. Everyone thought he was having a mental breakdown. His own family staged an intervention. The FCC agents returned and confiscated his equipment again, this time with legal threats. Felix realized the truth. Some people in government knew, had known for decades, managed the October broadcast as a classified phenomenon. Let people die to keep it secret rather than risk widespread panic about interdimensional contact. So Felix went underground. He created encrypted files of his research, sent them to journalists, researchers, radio engineers across the country. Most ignored him, but 3 people listened to the recording he included. And those 3 people died within 72 hours. Felix hadn't meant to kill them, but he'd underestimated how rare successful integration was. His brain had adapted, theirs hadn't. He'd accidentally murdered 3 people trying to prove he wasn't crazy. That's when Felix stopped trying to share, started observing instead. He modified his equipment to detect the pre-transmission conditions, the electromagnetic signatures that preceded each October broadcast. And he discovered the pattern. It wasn't random. It wasn't every Halloween. It followed a 26-year cycle based on solar position, planetary alignment, and variables he couldn't fully map. The next transmission would occur on October 31st, 2026, 2 years away. And based on his analysis of the spiral doorway's progression across recordings, this time it would open completely. Whatever had been trying to push through since 1901 would finally succeed. Felix is 53 years old now. He lives alone, monitors radio frequencies most people don't know exist, and documents patterns in electromagnetic activity that suggest reality is much thinner than we think. He's tried to warn people, posted anonymous warnings online. They're dismissed as conspiracy theories. He's contacted every government agency he can find. They either ignore him or threaten him with prosecution for violating his NDA. So Felix waits. October 31st, 2026 is 643 days away. He's calculated the exact second the transmission will begin. 11:47 p.m. Central Time. He's identified the station that will receive it. A small AM broadcaster in Oregon that sits on a geological formation with unusual magnetic properties. And he's made a decision. When that broadcast begins, Felix will be there. We'll be listening. We'll be documenting. Because if his calculations are correct, if the doorway opens fully this time, humanity needs someone who can perceive and communicate with what comes through. Someone whose brain has been rewired to handle the impossible. Someone willing to be the receiver for information that might save us or doom us. What happens on Halloween 2026 will depend on whether Felix's theory is correct. That the October broadcast isn't an invasion, but an invitation. That something vast and incomprehensible has been trying to establish contact for over a century. And Halloween is the only time our dimensions overlap enough to allow communication. That the deaths weren't attacks, but tragic failures of biology trying to evolve fast enough to meet something beyond human comprehension. Felix keeps the recording secured in a lead-lined safe that blocks all electromagnetic radiation. He's written instructions for what to do if he dies before 2026. He's identified 7 other radio engineers whose brain scans suggest they might survive the integration process. And he's accepted that he might be completely wrong. That what comes through might not be benevolent or neutral. That opening that doorway fully might end human civilization. But he also knows that ignoring it won't make it stop. The broadcasts will continue. The doorway will keep opening. And eventually, with or without human help, something is coming through. According to Felix's latest calculations, minor transmissions, partial broadcasts lasting only a few seconds, have been detected on 13 different Halloween nights since 2023. Each one is slightly longer than the last. The countdown has begun. And whether humanity is ready or not, October 31st, 2026 will change everything. The question isn't whether the door will open. It's whether Felix Nordstrom's rewired brain can successfully translate what comes through before it's too late. He has 643 days to prepare. And he's listening to the 47-second recording every single night, training his mind, expanding his perception, preparing to be the bridge between worlds. Because someone has to be. And Felix, the small-town radio engineer who couldn't leave the mystery alone, has made it his responsibility. The October broadcast is coming. And this time, it won't be 47 seconds. This time, according to Felix's projections, it will be permanent.